Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to Insights and Perspectives that are addressed by Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia at PCTE Group of Institutes. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with immense privilege and honor that I stand before you today as we have the rare opportunity to host a true luminary in the world of economics and public service. A personality whose contributions have not only shaped the economic trajectory of India, but also left an indelible mark on global economic policy. In the 25-year history of PCTE, we have yet to witness a figure as influential and respected as Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. And Grimson Hall has yet to see such an eminent personality grace its presence. Although he needs no introduction, it is only fitting that we take a moment to share a glimpse into his life and his unparalleled achievements. Born in 1943 in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, Mr. Ahluwalia's journey is one of dedication, service, and transformative economic thinking. After completing his undergraduate studies and St. Stephen's College, Delhi, he went on to become a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford, where he studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Magdalen College. It was here that his exceptional leadership qualities first shone through as he served as the president of the Oxford Union. This was just the beginning of a career that would go on to inspire generations. In 1968, Mr. Ahluwalia began his journey with the World Bank, quickly rising through the ranks to become the youngest division chief in its history. His expertise and contributions eventually brought him back to India, where he held key positions in the Ministry of Finance, including Finance Secretary and Commerce Secretary, before his appointment as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission in 2004. Did you know? During the 1990s crisis, one of the most challenging periods in India's economic history, Mr. Ahluwalia played a key role in India's economic reforms along with Dr. Montek Singh. Together, they spearheaded the industry Together, they spearheaded the economic liberalization that transformed India, driving growth, strengthening industry, and integrating the country into a global economy. Their leadership not only helped India weather the crisis, but also turned it into an economic powerhouse with notable gains in GDP, exports, and foreign investment. He has also held key positions in the Ministry of Finance, including Finance Secretary and Commerce Secretary, before being appointed as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commissions in 2004. His leadership in this role was pivotal in steering India's 11th and 12th five-year plans, which focused on inclusive growth, sustainable development, and economic reform. Mr. Ahluwalia's influence extended far beyond India's borders. As the Director of the Independent Evaluation Office at the IMF, he played a crucial role in advocating for greater transparency and reform within international financial institutions. His work not only redefined the global economic landscape, but also ensured that economic policies became more inclusive and responsive to the needs of the people. In recognition of his remarkable contributions, Mr. Ahluwalia was honored with the Padma Vibhushan, India's second highest civilian award. In 2011, his commitment to public service, his visionary economic thinking, and his relentless pursuit of growth with equity have made him a respected voice in international policy circles. In addition to his public service career, Mr. Ahluwalia is also a prolific author. His book, Backstage, The Story Behind India's High Growth Years, offers invaluable insight into India's economic evolution and his personal reflections on the nation's journey through its high growth years. Today, he continues to shape the conversation around global development as a distinguished fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Progress and as a member of high-level advisory group formed by the IMF and the World Bank to tackle the dual challenges of climate change and COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ahluwalia's life and work stand as a testament of what visionary leadership, dedication to service, and intellectual rigor can achieve. His legacy will continue to inspire not only policymakers and economists, but also anyone who believes in the power of transformative ideas to change the world for the better. Please join me in welcoming with great respect and admiration Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Okay.
morning, everyone. Good morning. Before we came in, Mr. Ahluwalia told me that I would like to interact and engage rather than give a speech. So, is there someone who has a question ready? All right, let's start with that. You want to leave here? Well, there's a mic there. You can sit down.
Well, let me first begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me and for all of you for attending. Very large audience, so you must be, and it's a lovely day outside, so you're kind of devoting a lot of your time which you could be spending having fun, listening to someone. And you know, I felt that instead of giving some prepared speech, I'd really like to address issues that interest you. The danger with giving a speech is that I can feel that off, but I may not be talking about what it is that interests you. So what I suggested is that instead of a speech followed by a few questions, why don't I invite 5 or 6 of you to raise some questions which are at the top of your mind, and then I'll get a sense of what is it that you want to hear about. And then I won't answer individual questions, we can do that later, but give me a sense of what is it that people are really concerned about. So, with that background, 5 or 6 of you please volunteer to ask questions. So, please raise your hands so I can choose a selection with a nice balance between men and women. How many questions do we have? Those who want to ask questions, raise your hands. 2, 3. No women at all? All the women have the answers? No questions? Really? Okay, well let's get the question. Just read out your question.
Firstly, good morning, sir. My name is Aman and I am doing MBA, Finances study in MBA. So my question is related to finance. So there is pressure from the public on the central government that there is a huge inflation is rising and the price of the commodities are rising each and every year. There is a pressure on the RBI saying that how the RBI works. Central government wants that inflation should be there should be decline in the inflation. So on the other hand, from the RBI's perspective, we said how the RBI works that there is inflation in the economy. Reason for the same is that there is money supply, and when there is money supply, there are the production activities. So RBI works on the model of that there should be increase in the GDP and production activities in the country. On the opposite side, central government of India works on the perspective that there should be decline in the inflation. So they make it is a political agenda in the next elections, so that we can answer the politics about that we get the inflation decline. So there is conflicting situation between how the RBI works and central government of India wants. So my question is, what is your point of view or what is your take on this situation?
Good question. Let me just take a little bit more. Okay, that's a good question. Next one. I don't want to answer that, I just want to get a sense of what people want to hear about. Second question. Somebody from there? Yeah. When you come here, I'll be able to both see and hear you better. Yeah, okay.
So, very good morning, sir. My name is Deepak Sharma. I'm from MBA. I'm pursuing international business. So, my question was related to the economic growth of India. Like recent reports has been admired that the India's growth is being 6.4% of the 2024 and 2025, which was the slowest of the last 4 years. So, what are the factors which are contributing to this slowdown, and what could be the factors which could be decreasing the slowdown of the India's economic growth?
Okay, so inflation and how you manage it, growth, and what's going on there. What's the third question?
My name is Arjun Singh. I am an MBA Global. So my question is regarding you had the Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission. Now after 2014, there is a new organization came into existence, PCTE. So I want to understand about what happened in PCTE and Planning Commission. What is the difference between them? And is PCTE is working properly than Planning Commission? Thank you.
Okay, well I think that gives me all right, let's make that the last question.
Tell me about your economic reform experience. Tell me about your economic reform experience.
Sorry, economic.
He wants to know your experience of economic.
Oh my God. I tell you, it's very dangerous asking older people to walk you through their experience, because that will get you stuck for hours. Now, if you're really interested, since I happen to have written a book called Backstage, which actually tells you at least the story. It's not the story of just me, but it's the story of what happened, how did reforms happen, etc. And since we're all students, I recommend that you read that book. It will tell you, at least from the perspective of, I was then a younger person, obviously, coming back to India toward the end of the 1970s, what did India look like? It wasn't a well-performing country at all. What changes got made? I think we did quite a lot. We did less than we should have. We should have done it faster, but then politics makes it difficult to do things as fast as you would like. But there's no doubt that compared to the previous situation, the reforms that were introduced in 1991, when Mr. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister and Dr. Montek Singh was Finance Minister, and I think this is recognized around the whole world, that this changed the face of India. Okay? It's not, by the way, that the reforms are some wonderful thing that was invented in India. We were just doing the wrong things earlier. I mean, the rest of the world was going in one direction, we were stuck in another. So if you ask me, it was a no-brainer. And the real question is, why didn't we do it 10 years earlier? Why didn't we do it twice as fast? And the reasons, that's very much tied up with politics. But it's good that we did it, and it has had an impact. But I think today, most people think that, India's kind of on the move. We probably exaggerate how well we are doing, that most countries do, and it's okay. But I think we are basically, for a long time, we were underperforming compared to other developing countries. Until very recently, we were doing quite well compared to most countries, but much less well than China. I think what has changed is that China's run into the constraints that emerge when you become richer. So their growth rate has come down. It was going to come down anyway. We are still at the stage where the growth rate can be higher. It slows down, but maybe we should get it up. So the present position is that people think that here is a large country which seems to be growing faster than other developing countries and is now growing faster than China. But these other countries are at much higher per capita income levels than we are. So although we're going faster, it's going to take us a long time to get to where they are. Now, that's good, but it's not as if we've achieved everything. And that's really, in answer to your question on the story of what we did, it's a long story and there are different ways of telling it, and I'm only one way of telling it. But do read my book. Now that I've ended the advertisement, I will get back to some of these questions. I think you're all asking questions that are at the top of many people's minds. Let me first deal with this Planning Commission, Niti Aayog thing. I should say that I can tell you from the inside what the Planning Commission did. I can't tell you from the inside what the Niti Aayog does, but I can give you a sense. You know, in the old days, the Planning Commission was basically a central part of the government which looked at the performance of different ministries. Okay? And it was meant to feed into the government which are the ministries that are doing well, where is it that things are not going the way they should, and most of all, you have limited money, and where should you put that money? So the Planning Commission was quite central in deciding the allocation of resources. Also, it used to distribute a certain amount of money to the state governments, okay? As just a grant to the states to do their own planning. Now, over time, the states began to say, quite rightly in my view, that we don't want to depend on these planning commission distributed grants. Just give us the money to the finance commission and a share in our resources, and we'll spend them as best we can. So that function was bound to go down anyway. And the whole issue of deciding allocation, should this ministry get more or another ministry get more, this is now done somewhere between the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Ministry. Niti Aayog is not involved in it at all. So that part of the Planning Commission's function has basically been subsumed by other organizations. I can't tell you whether it's being done well or not being done well. That's something that you have to look into what's being done, but it's not being done in Niti Aayog. So Niti Aayog is doing more of kind of a coordination in a lot of the public presentations. There's a focus that Niti Aayog should have a dialogue with the states on what is it that they should do, bring out the relative performance of different states so that states and the center can get a sense who's doing well, who's not doing well. They have just put out a report, which you must have seen in the newspapers, which looks at the fiscal performance of the different states. And of course, you know, in government, this is very difficult to say that somebody is a bad performer. So they are using this terminology that the lowest category is called aspirational. I mean, the best category is called very something. The next category, the lowest category, which isn't doing well, is called aspirational, which means that you're really not doing well, but you can aspire to do better. It's fine. Incidentally, Punjab is in the last category. In fact, if you look at the latest calculation, this is not my calculation, but Niti Aayog's calculation. And I must tell you that even earlier, we were also of the view that the fiscal problem in Punjab is really bad. You can say it's for historical reasons, whatever it is, but the debt burden and all the rest of it is very high. And that's borne out in this report also. So that's the question between Niti Aayog, Planning Commission. They do different things. A lot of what the Planning Commission did is now done somewhere between the PM's office and the Finance Ministry. I have no idea how or in what distribution. Then we come to the other questions that go around growth. I've seen in the newspaper reports a lot of focus on the fact that the growth rate is slowing down quarter by quarter. The most recent growth rate is quite low. Now, you know, here what has happened is that in the old days, since we were planning for every 5 years, we used to have a target for those 5 years, whatever the planned target is. So year by year, you could look at what the growth rate is, and are you on track or you're not on track. There are no growth rate targets that the government has announced, but what the government has said at different times is that we're going to become a $5 trillion economy by a certain year, then $10 trillion by some other year, most recently $30 trillion by 2047. And with these numbers, you can always calculate that if it's a steady growth, what is the growth rate you are aiming at? And you know that growth rate turns out to be around 8%. Okay? The most recent formal target is that the Viksit Bharat concept, which is that India will become a developed country by 2047, which is the 100th year of independence. That's a good idea to have a target for the 100th year of independence. Question is, what does Viksit Bharat mean? I don't think anyone denies that Viksit Bharat cannot just be economic growth. I mean, you can have economic growth and very bad income distribution, worsening of distribution between states, very bad gender balance, etc., bad health, bad education, and so on. I don't think anyone would call that satisfactory, nor is the government saying so. So that's only one target. But still, the question arises that you must have some income target. And the notion of developed country, many people say that what must be in the back of the government's mind is that you look at the World Bank estimate today, and where the middle income category is countries that have income level up to $14,000 per capita today. Okay? I mean, there's a low income category which is below $1,500 or something, and then from that to $12,000 is middle. When the economic reforms began, India was in the low income category. We then went into the bottom of the middle income category. So Viksit Bharat could mean that we get out of this middle income category to something like $14,000 per person. If you work out what that would require, again you come to growth rates of 8.5% in real terms. Not inflation growth, but real growth. So then the question is that, are we on that track? Now here, there's a lot of analysis which says that, you know, at a low income level, you can get high growth. But you know, as your income level rises, per capita income level rises, it becomes more difficult to have higher growth. And indeed, economies slow down when per capita income goes high. Now, the developed countries today are growing at about 2% per year. So if we are going to target getting to the developed country stage by 2047, and the average growth rate required is 8 or 8.5%, then it's not unreasonable to think that in the first 10 years, you should be growing at 9.5. Then you slow down to 8.5. Then in the next decade, you slow down still further. So if you take that view, then the long-term target of 8.5% would require, say, a first 10-year target of 9.5%. And then you ask the question, are we at that target or no? But there's no question that you're not. The growth rate that we have been having for the last 10 years, actually since the end of the UPA government, the growth rate is something of the order of 5.8%. Now, this has been a period when you had many shocks to the economy. Demonetization was one shock. COVID was another shock. The current uncertainty in the global economy, which is quite exceptional, is yet another shock. So, you know, it's not easy to compare whether a particular period is better than an earlier period or not. So you have to allow for all these factors. But whatever it is, I don't think we are at the kind of growth rate we need in order to reach Viksit Bharat. But you can say that, look, it's 1 year, 2 years, things will change. So if you address the question, Does getting to Viksit Bharat mean continuing more or less as we are doing? Definitely not. It means you must gear your policies up to do a lot better than you have been doing. And how much better? Well, maybe 2 percentage points of growth and so on. And then if you look at the debate, that always boils down to saying, you can do better because you're going to do economic reforms. See, in 1991, that's what we did. We said that, look here, India is one of the slowest growing countries if you look back. And we must improve. And the improvement took the form of economic reforms. So, economic reforms is not something that you do just once. For this generation, you ought to ask yourselves this question. And you ought to ask your teachers this question. That for our future, which is the next 20 years, what are the most important things we must do in order to get an extra 2 percentage points of growth? You would be quite wrong to take the view that we are doing fine and all that I need for my future, that this should carry on. We are not at that level. We can get there. But the real question is, are there some economic reforms that will increase the growth rate of GDP by about 2 percentage points? But furthermore, will they do it in an inclusive manner? I mean, in the Planning Commission, we used to call it inclusive growth. Today, the slogan is different, but people say, no, sabka saath, sabka vikas. That means the same thing. So you have to make sure that it is a growth which benefits everyone, okay? That's one thing. It's also a regional issue. I mean, you cannot have in a geographically widespread country, you cannot have a successful growth performance in which all the states don't participate equally. And the fact is, for the last 20 years, our growth rate has not been geographically equal. I mean, some states have done much better, other states have not done so well. And the states that have not done so well, they have to make the pickup. And this is one of the big questions that comes up, that, is the formula the same? Is the reform agenda the same for all states? Or the reform agenda has to be tailored to the specific requirements of each state? So what is important in one state may be quite different from what is important in another state. And I think as we develop, and states also become more aware, that the powers of government are not concentrated in the center. Almost half the things that matter for ease of doing business are in the realm of state governments. And in the debate, you often, every state, ever since I've been interacting with them in the old days, all of them would say that my problem is because you're not giving me money. This is completely wrong. In fact, they should be asked, are you using the money you have well? And if you're not using it well, should the center give you more money? It's a real question. And many of the better performing states, the ones in the south, they're raising questions that egalitarian distribution of central government resources is not actually fair, because the resources are coming from the states that are growing, and they're going to the states that are not growing, and if those states are responsible for their poor performance, then why are we rewarding them for not growing? I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know what your regional composition of this group is. But Punjab also is an example, because Punjab in the year 2000 or so, Punjab was one of the top states in terms of per capita GDP. It is now 14th, 15th. because the growth rate of Punjab in these 20 years has slowed down. Now the issue is the solution for Punjab the same as for Tamil Nadu or for Karnataka? Or are there some problems that are very specific to Punjab that need to be addressed first? This requires an analysis at the state level. And when I was in the Planning Commission, it was my view that we were not conducting enough. I'm admitting the failure on our part. I had said then to the Commission, that you fellows, whenever you talk to chief ministers, you give them the same lecture. Every chief minister is told, you must improve saving, you must improve efficiency, you must improve ease of doing business. There's no difference between what a problem in one state and a problem in the other state. So we wanted to convey the impression that, look, we should have an approach that says, you are doing well in certain areas. You're doing not well in other areas. And please try and improve these areas. I'm not saying we succeeded because we just started and these things take 10 years, 20 years. I hope they're doing it now. The trouble is now, there is no mechanism in which the central government interacts with the states individually. There is no, Niti Aayog does not call individual states for discussion. So while they put out a lot of material which enables the states to look at their own performance, I'm not aware of where the discussion takes place. Maybe it has to be done at the state government level, at the state level, by the internal processes where business and other thought leaders and so on say to chief ministers that, look, this thing has come out of Niti Aayog and it says that this state is doing very well and this state is doing very well, how are we doing? I think we need much more of this to be built into our systems. In fact, we have wrongly, in my view, thought that all these problems can get resolved at the central government level. They can't. I mean, the best example of that is agriculture. Agriculture is not a central government subject. If a state's agriculture is doing badly, you have to admit that has to be the fault of the state government because the central government has no control over any of those things. I think these are on growth. We need to ask the question: is the country as a whole growing adequately? I think it's doing reasonably well compared to other countries, not as well as our targets. It has to do more. Doing more means doing more reforms. What are these reforms? That you have to also do on a state-specific basis. Some states must do this to a greater extent, other states must do something else. So those are the issues that I don't want to give you a set answer, but I think that is what we need to focus on. Now let me address this other question you raised, which I'm sure is at the top of everybody's mind, that inflation, RBI, central government, many people think that if there's inflation, we should raise the interest rate. Other people say, no, we should raise the interest rate, it will affect growth. These are all classic problems that all countries face. But the short answer is that most governments would be concerned about both inflation and about growth. And the point is that interest rate is only one instrument. So if you want, it's not the case that if you want to protect growth, you have to have only a lower interest rate. You have to do lots of other things. So it is possible to use the interest rate to focus on inflation and look at all the other levers that will generate growth. And there's no reason to think that you can't generate growth because the interest rate has to be kept a little high. Please remember that when people say the interest rate is high, what affects growth is a real interest rate. I mean, if you're a businessman and you're borrowing, you're borrowing at whatever it is, 7, 8, 9%, 10% or something. If the inflation rate is 8% and you're borrowing at 10%, then the real interest rate you're paying is only 2%. So inflation goes up, interest rate goes up, real interest rate doesn't necessarily go up. So business is more concerned about whether it's getting credit than whether the credit is actually being provided at a lower absolute rate, because inflation helps businessmen to reduce, in effect, the burden of their debt. I think the real problem is that we're not focusing enough on what needs to be done to raise growth. What are the instruments that will jack up growth? And the more we focus on that, the less it will seem that the interest rate and growth rate challenge is an internal contradiction. So I don't know if that helps answering the question, but any other question I'd be happy to take. Yeah? Yes?
So there is a talk about the state should be involved in the overall development of the country. So what is the take on this freebie culture as state governments giving freebies to the people of the states?
No, that's a good, I always try to avoid giving these answers to newspaper men because they convert an answer into a 4-line headline. Montek Ahluwalia against freebies. Now let's be clear. It is the job of government to provide certain services, and many of these services are either highly subsidized or should be free. Okay? So from that point of view, there's no doubt that government should have a ready supply of, as a general rule, public services should all be free. I mean, maintaining law and order, for example, is a public service. You don't pay for it as you use the services. Education is not technically a public good because the education benefits you, but it benefits society because we produce an educated member of the labor force. I think that public education should be free. People should be free to go to private schools if they want, and maybe they think the private schools give a better education. But somebody who doesn't have money merely by virtue of being an Indian should have an assurance that he can get an education free. Certainly school, maybe even university, in public university. Then there'll be a separate question that you're doing all that, but is the quality of public education good? Well, that's a separate issue. It should be good, but I wouldn't call that a free. Okay? But you know, there are certain things that are freebies which I think can legitimately be questioned. And the first thing to realize is that when freebies are given, governments that give freebies should, if they're totally honest, they should tell the electorate that this is how it's being financed. In other words, one person says, look, I think we should give whatever it is, so much free power. You make your list of what you want to give. Either you should say, and I think this is going to raise the fiscal deficit by a certain amount. And I think that's good for the economy because we have too low a fiscal deficit. Some states do. And we can afford it. Or, if the fiscal deficit is too high, then people might say, well, look here, you've done this in order to benefit this group, but as a result, the fiscal deficit is high, and that's going to have other consequences which will hurt other people. The typical consequence is that if the fiscal deficit is too high and the state is not allowed to borrow to cover that deficit, then basically you cut some other expenditure. Either salaries are not paid, or some expansion of employment that should occur doesn't occur, or some regular jobs are not filled and they're filled by contract labor. People should be clear that I'm doing this, it's going to help this person at this cost. So actually we need to move the public debate so that people become suspicious of freebies and start asking the question, how is it being financed? If a government transparently said, this is how I'm going to finance it, I have no problem. But that is not what happens. Typically what happens is, all parties are doing this, which is not a point being made by any one party. People just announce the freebie. and nobody quite knows what the consequences will be. And this is, by the way, not easy to do. Having said that, it requires a very educated electorate and a very sophisticated political system which holds politicians responsible for fiscal management. Knowing that people know that, look, because you gave freebies, you are not able to undertake cleaning of the river waters, as a result of which my water supply is polluted, as a result of which my kids got infections. And you are responsible for that. But nobody thinks of that. Most people think whoever got the freebies is wonderful and everybody else thinks how clever they have managed to get political support. So how you do this, I mean, frankly, both the opposition, the press, informed public opinion, professionals, non-government organizations, all these people need to engage in a very active political process. And you can see that, all over the world, most recently in the United States, the political process is broke. So you can get away with whatever you like and get elected. So happening there is bound to happen here also.
I was just there.
Sorry?
Yeah, I was just trying to tie together your first and the second response. Now, we are talking about freebies, we're talking about Viksit Bharat, we're talking about what a developed nation should ideally look like beyond $14,000 per capita. But we're also saying India is right now spending what? 2% on education and 1.6% on health. That doesn't come anywhere close to Viksit Bharat, right?
No, I think that's a very important point. And actually, I don't want to go back to my book Backstage, but I addressed this issue there.
That if you make a list of what people tell you the government needs to do as a way to improve our economic performance, the following will come out very strongly. Number one, the government is not spending enough on education. Number two, the government is not spending enough on health. Number three, the government is not spending enough on infrastructure, especially infrastructure in rural areas. Number four, the government, to be honest, is not spending enough also on defense. Because we are not in a zone of peace. We are in a zone which is pretty kind of dicey, and we hope that it won't lead to war. But to quote a Chinese philosopher, Sun Tzu, if you want peace, prepare for war. Assuming that you're going to have peace and not spending on defense at all. Now what is happening, let's take defense. In the 1980s, we were spending 3.7% of GDP on defense. 3.7% of GDP. I used to be told, those days I was with the Prime Minister's office when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister. I used to be told by the defense guys that, look, with China gaining strength, Pakistan a continuous problem, we cannot afford to lose sight of defense preparedness. We should have more on defense. So I was saying that, look, 3.7% of GDP is pretty good, and we should concentrate on expanding the GDP. If you expand the GDP and keep 3.7%, you guys will get enough money. And I met one of these fellows last week in Delhi, and he said to me, a defense person, he said to me, sir, I remember you telling me in the 1980s that if we do growth, we get money. You know what's happened? The defense expenditure instead of 3.7% is less than 2%. I said, yeah, I agree with you, it shouldn't be less than 2%, because China is spending so much more. So let's say you make up your mind that you say that you should at least spend 0.5% of GDP more on defense. So that's 0.5% more. No doubt about it that on education, the government should be spending at least 1% more on GDP. So you add another 1% to the 0.5. No doubt whatsoever on health that the government should be spending another 1%. Center and states together, because the states have, the bulk of the primary health is there, so that gives you 1%. Then you look at R&D, the way the world is going, climate change is taking place, we need to have much more agricultural R&D, we have to have better R&D in some of the new technologies, and our R&D levels, the government are very low, and also in the private sector, they're very low. Both the government and the private sector in India are not spending up on R&D. So you can add another 1% on that. So if you add all these things up, you get to something like an additional 3.5% of GDP has to be spent to meet these demands. Then you look at the fiscal deficit. And fiscal deficit, if you combine the center and the states together, because you should look at it together, the combined fiscal deficit is something like 8%. If you look at the global pattern, well-performing countries have a fiscal deficit of 4%. So 8% must be reduced to 4%. That means another 4%, either of revenue or savings, is needed. So add that 4% to the 3.5 I've just added, you need a fiscal turnaround of 7.5% of GDP in total. You have to decide over what period. You're going to have to do it in 1 year. If you're going to do it, let's say, in 5 years, then you need a turnaround for something like 1.2% of GDP every year, and cumulatively. That is a huge task. You know, how do you do it? Well, maybe you can raise more money through taxation, not by raising tax rates, but plugging loopholes, etc. That's one area. Maybe there are certain areas where taxes should be raised, then you have to identify those and make a political case so that people are willing to accept that. I can tell you there are many areas where Indian tax rates are absurdly low. Most of all, the tax rate on property. You know, a lot of these services are provided by local governments. And India's property tax rate is absurdly low. I mean, if those of you who have relatives abroad, how many of you have relatives abroad?
Relatives abroad?
Relatives, that's all. I thought there were much more. Ludhiana is a much more international place than that. I see slowly people are acknowledging more relatives abroad. But honestly, I ask you, those of you who have relatives abroad, particularly if they're in the United States and so on, just ask them that what is the annual property tax they pay on the valuation of their house, okay? And compare it with what your parents pay here. So my guess is that those fellows have a rate which is maybe 10 to 20 times higher. So we, for some odd reason, have got stuck with, houses that are otherwise in property values of 20 crore are paying a ludicrously small amount of property tax. And this is all richer people I'm talking about, not the very poor. That's one example. You can think about this. But another area is saving. Do we need all the things that we're giving away for free? I would say, for example, that the food subsidy that we give, I'm not making a recommendation on what to do, because that's a sensitive subject. It says I'm not in government. I don't see why I should be vulnerable to criticism. But to ask the question that, the original idea that we are going to give free food was that, people are very poor and they cannot afford food, and therefore we must give free food. Very reasonable. But over time, the percentage of poverty has gone down. We are still giving for about 3/4 of the population 5 kg of wheat and rice free. Now, what is the rationale for this? It was introduced, the free thing was introduced at the time of COVID. It was continued, okay, so the government is committed to. We should have a debate now that 4 years down the road or 3 years down the road, is this going to continue or is it the time to give it up? If not, give it up. Could we say that it will only be for the bottom 20%? Certainly not for 75% of the population. Now, unless we have these kinds of debates, every existing freebie will be continued and you'll add more freebies at the time of every election. This is really not at all sensible. And it's not feasible either. But I don't see anyone, I don't see any political party willing to say, we're going to think about this. In fact, there should be a rule that, you cannot ask a political party in the middle of the election to say anything sensible. They'll say whatever, give them vote. But the general election is a long time away. So each party should be asked that if you come to power 4 years down the road, what is your policy on freebies? Let them write it down now. But there's no pressure. I mean, you're the educated public. I mean, if you can't put pressure on your MPs, nobody can. So the question I'm asking you is, when you meet your MPs next, in a social context or in an otherwise, please ask them this question. Do you believe freebies are doing damage? And if you do, how are you going to overcome it? I think we need this educated public opinion must feed this back into the growth process. I don't know if this answers your question, but I think you have a huge challenge there, and I've given you a total.
7.5%.
Yeah, it could be 8, but that's the order of magnitude. It doesn't have to be done in 1 year. Actually, to my mind, every political party should be asked, what is your strategy for reducing the fiscal deficit by 1% per year over the next 5 years? Okay, well.
Good afternoon, sir. So my name is Gaurav.
None of the Punjabi women have questions. Can I assume you all know what you're on this side of the answers? They have all the answers. They don't ask you questions. Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Gaurav and I work here as an assistant professor in the Department of Business Management. So my question is similar to what Harpreet ma'am asked. We see that India has been doing a lot of developmental activities in comparison to the world. Yet when we see the Human Development Index, I think that is something that India is currently lacking on. We show a very meager growth. So can you tell me what is the inherent reason behind that? Why are we not rising in terms of human development and what is required?
Well, human development is a sort of, you could ask the same question about per capita income. I mean, we are rising, but others are also rising. So I guess that in terms of per capita income, we have risen in relative terms. But from being 134, we may be now 125 or something. These things take a long time. But the main thing on human development is that we come out poorly on education, health, and nutrition. And I mean, that is a weakness, but it shows you also that, a lot of our thinking on development has focused on per capita income. That's the growth story, and that's not a bad story, although it's not as good as it could be. And on per capita income, you see a steady improvement. But on education, what has happened is, it depends on how you measure education. If you measure education by the percentage of children in schools, there's huge improvement. But if you measure education by the percentage of
children in class 5 who can read a text meant for class 2, there's almost no improvement. So money is being spent, schools are being built, kids are in school, but the quality of education they get is not particularly good. Much the same thing is true in the case of health. Again, it depends on what indicator you use. I mean, for example, if the indicator is number of births that are, if you like, assisted by a skilled birth attendant or that take place in hospitals, big improvement. But if you ask the question, infant nutrition or state of health, the improvement is not there. So, we don't have, because the top 20% of the population of India is quite well fed and quite well schooled and there's no deficiency. But if you go down to the bottom 50%, that's just not true. And I think we are a very class segmented society. I doubt if you even know anyone socially who comes from, let's say, the bottom 40 or 50% of the population. So, this is a fundamental problem. But that is also changing in some dimensions. For example, it's clear that opportunities are expanding. Look, take elite games like cricket. When I was a kid, only very upper-class people of some sort got into cricket. You write down the princes and things like that. Now, all the cricketing heroes come from very ordinary backgrounds. So it's not true that there's no social mobility. But it doesn't add up to very much. I mean, in the sense that, if we produce 3 to 4 times as good cricketers we need to be competitive, that's only a few hundred people. The question really is, what's the quality all the way down? And that is where all these human development indicators are measuring improvements all the way down. Now, many people also say, by the way, that some of these measures are biased. They may reflect standards that are not relevant for us, etc., etc. I can't comment on that. But I think it is giving you a signal that while we are improving, there's a hell of a long way to go.
My name is Chaksh, and my question is related to debt GDP ratio that we are having in India. And we already talked about Punjab. We are not utilizing the funds properly. So, what if we are not utilizing the funds properly and our debt keep on increasing? What's your view on it?
No. I think both points are relevant. On tax GDP ratio, there's a lot of debate currently going on. I mean, some people say that India's tax to GDP ratio is too low, but other people say that's not true. So that is, I've talked to people who've done a lot of research on this subject. So the first thing I would say is, my good friend Sujit Bhalla has written recently, lambasting the people who say the tax GDP ratio is too low, because he says the tax GDP ratio is too high. So that's another example in economics. If you want to have a debate, you're always ready to have a debate. And I won't pronounce on that, because part of the problem is, when we talk of tax to GDP ratio in many countries, what is called the social security contribution is included in the tax ratio. Now, in that case, these are formal sector societies where virtually everybody is making social sector contribution. The tax GDP ratio goes up, and the expenditure also goes up. Okay? So it cuts both ways. We don't have that sort of social security contribution. The percentage of the population that pays is very, very small. But the point is, we have all these expenditures. So somehow or the other, you have to finance it. And on balance, my feeling is that there's a lot that we could do to rationalize our tax system, which will make it yield more revenue. I mean, the most obvious case is the GST. Everybody in all political parties is saying that we should have a few rates, maybe 2, maybe 3, but we have 5. And it causes a lot of confusion. Now let's see whether the next GST commission will make some progress or not. But I think these are, it's important for our political masters, different states, they should have the feeling that the public is asking these questions. Yeah.
One more point that Indian government has taken a lot of debt, and you talked about debt as well. So can we continue on the same path? Like every year we are making a lot of interest payments that are basically really well budget. So even the states like Punjab, they are under huge debt. What if the situation keeps on going? Like, what do you think that will happen in future?
As you said, I haven't read this Niti Aayog report, so I'm going to get it. Maybe you should also look at it, but they say that Punjab is the worst in terms of the fiscal situation. I think any government in Punjab has to address that question. But you know, the biggest problem really is that first, some of the policies that have traditionally been followed, like for example giving free power to farmers, is not in the interest of the state, not in the interest of state agriculture. It's leading to excess use of power to draw out water, it's causing the water table to go down, etc., etc., etc. But you know, this has been known for 20 years. I don't question who's going to take it up, who's going to find a sensible way of solving it. Probably require a bit of combination of both the center and the state being willing to address this thing. But you know, when you ask the state, they just say that we can persuade people to move away from rice, providing there's a huge subsidy given to move that, and we can't afford the subsidy, so the center can have them. You know, you're probably more familiar with how these issues are being picked up by different state governments. But definitely, for example, used to depend a lot on having a healthy small-scale industry. And you know, all this ease of doing business stuff, most of it lies in the realm of state government. I'm told that there are reports that have said that many of the provisions that we have in our industrial regulations, which basically criminalize a large number of things, which are otherwise procedural violations, they should be decriminalized. Now, I'm not saying that you take no action if there is a violation, but the moment it becomes criminal, it becomes an opportunity to extract money. Whereas if it's non-criminal, then you know people get debated in the normal course. Now, this is not just for Punjab, it's for all state governments. I think there's a report in the government of India that says there are 15,000 different regulations, there are 15,000 provisions, center and state, where a violation is potentially reliable to, it is potentially a criminal offense, which means you can go to jail. Hundreds of people have said that there is no justification for such a huge number. But I'm not aware of any state government that has got up and said, I have cut this down from X to 10% of X. You know, if you do some of these things, my guess is you will get faster growth in the small scale sector. That will lead to better GST and tax revenue collection and so on.
Sir, may I ask you one question?
Certainly.
I'm Sachin Jain. I'm faculty here and it's an honor and privilege to have you on our campus. So since you talked about GST, there are many slabs and I take just two examples. When you buy a luxury car, you pay 28% GST, another additional 22% GST and so on. My question pertains to when I buy a health insurance policy. I have to pay GST on that as well. Government is not able to provide me the kind of health facilities which I may require. Right? I have already paid my income tax also. So is this justified? One thing. Secondly, in the near future, as we move from conventional energy, that is petroleum and diesel, towards electric and hydrogen vehicles, do we see in the near future or remotest possibility in the far future that petrol, diesel and all these items will come under the GST regime. Because the amount of tax collected on these items, everybody now knows it is in the public domain. People, they do feel that it is totally unjustified because in today's world, petroleum and diesel, we move on those things and it's not a luxury. So these are the ways.
Well, I mean, since you are not, I don't know what, these things are not subject to GST at the moment. They are outside GST.
They are outside. I wish to know whether there is a possibility they will come.
Well, who am I to comment, but you should send this representation to the finance minister to consider. Mrs. Kamal's question. If we succeed in decarbonizing the economy, if we succeed, because that's what we want, and we should do, then basically we will not get any revenue at all from diesel and petrol because we won't be using diesel and petrol. Right? That will lead to a decline in tax revenue of about 3% of GDP for the center and the states. That means that the 7.5 that I mentioned, put that for 5 years, but if this 3% will take place over the next 30 years, but still some part of this 3% you should factor in for the next 10. So actually lots of changes will occur and governments will have to respond to this sooner or later. Thank you all. Thanks very much.
And discussion with students before he gives his speech. So we all focused on that and forgot our own program. So if I may please, can I request Mr. Swatan Chana, Director of Student Welfare, to please present I would also request Dr. K.N.S. Thum, Director General PCTE Institutes, to present the memento to honorable guest, Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, on behalf of PCTE family. Thank you, sir. I request Dr. Naresh Singh, Director, Punjab College of Technical Education, to close the vote of thanks, please.
Good afternoon, boys and girls. Long discussion, very healthy insights, perspectives, immaculable thoughts, wisdom, experience. First of all, let's give him a big round of applause. Good afternoon, everyone. Esteemed guests, faculties, sir, and my lovely students. It's both an honor and a privilege to stand before you today to close what has been very enriching, a thought-provoking session. On behalf of the entire PCTE family, I express my heartfelt gratitude to Sir Montek Singh Ahluwalia for his gracious presence, impactful thoughts, and experience and wisdom. Dr. Ahluwalia, sir, your presence here today is a true honor. Your pioneering work in shaping India's morality and physical policy has not only transformed the landscape of the country, but has also laid the foundation for youngsters to come and to make of it for India. Your instrumental role in planning commission, especially during the pivotal moments in India's economic journey, continues to inspire generation and future economics and politicians to come. In today's session, we are fortunate to gain insight from who has been a forefront into India's economic reforms. Your work has not been just been confined to the hall of governance, but also it touches the lives of millions of Indians. What we are just because of you, sir. You are always a champion of economic growth, equity, physical, monetary responsibilities that continue to resonate strongly, especially among future leaders of this nation. We as a college are extremely fortunate to have you, an opportunity to host you today. Before I conclude, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to everyone present here. And with my folded hands, I express heartfelt gratitude to you, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia.
I request everyone to